To think that God has no emotion is entirely false. I don't know too many that would hold to that line of thinking, but I have met some every now and then. God has emotion, and also Christ, who came in the flesh, showed a tremendous amount of emotion. And this evening we're going to be looking at a particular psalm, and it's Psalm 69. And Psalm 69 concerns the Messiah. It's written by David, but it concerns the Messiah, and we'll get to that in just a second. And you can go ahead and turn to that particular psalm. But as we see in John chapter 11, Jesus wept, and he's weeping because of the sorrow he sees with Martha and Mary over their brother Lazarus who has died, and all the others who are grieving. And he weeps with them. From just this morning in Luke chapter 15, talking about the joy in heaven. There is joy there. And Jesus would he not share in that joy? Because he would be the shepherd in that first parable there in Luke chapter 15. He also represents, I should say, that woman in the second parable who lost the one coin. Well, that's him too. But there is joy that is in heaven. Also, Deuteronomy chapter 6 and 15, it's not the only place where it speaks of this, but the anger of the Lord. The anger of God. Talking about his wrath, and you don't want to be on the wrong side of that. But there's also love. 1 John and 4 verses 8 and 16 speaks of God is love. And we can most certainly see by the example of God himself, prior to his Christ, to seeing Christ himself, that there is a tremendous amount of love that is there. But in this particular psalm, we see, Psalm 69, we'll see where there is sorrow. And verse 3 shows that. Concern, verse 6. Shame, verses 7, 12, and 19. And 19, it's reproach, shame, and dishonor. We see that of loneliness in verses 8 and 20. Zeal in verse 9. Brokenhearted in verse 20. Hope in verses 32 to 36. Ending all of this. We see an enormous range of emotions in this psalm. And this psalm, though it's written by David, does not concern David himself. Because there's too many things in it that refer to the Christ. And I have to say that there would be some things that would be a matter of guesswork if it weren't for the New Testament pointing back to this. Matter of fact, inside this particular psalm, Psalm 69, we have one of the few places where the disciples themselves saw, oh yeah, Psalm 69, the zeal for your house has where are we? We're at 69. Because zeal for your house has eaten me up. They remembered that, and they applied it to Jesus in the temple and what he did in the temple. They remembered that. And that's one of the few places where we see the disciples doing that on their own. But they did it. And this particular psalm has too many things concerning that are linked to the Messiah for it to be just sort of about the Messiah. It is the Messiah himself. And David, obviously, is the one putting it down. It's the Holy Spirit who is guiding him. But it's one of those, like Psalm 22, that if the Christ were writing a psalm, he would be writing these psalms. It's as though the Christ, in his lifetime upon this earth, were writing these psalms in the condition that he was going through. Now, Isaiah 53 and verse 3. He is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we did not esteem him. That's Isaiah 53, speaking about this. Now, Psalm 69 is also speaking about this very thing. It starts off with these 4 words, "Save me, O God." And then we have this poetic imagery that is in this. "For the waters have come up to my neck. I sink in deep mire where there is no standing. I have come into deep waters where the floods overflow me." Here is this first imagery of someone who is in the mire, someone who is in the bog, and they are sinking. This person writing this is sinking and calling for the salvation of God. Now, in the next verse, it switches to where we know this. Of course, we understand this is poetry, but this is poetic speaking. This is trouble. And in verses 14 and 15, we're going to see where this returns, and we'll get to there in just a second, where this theme returns and then speaks about what it's really about, in case you are wondering. But in the next verse, I am weary, verse 3, "I'm weary with my crying, my throat is dry, my eyes fail while I wait for my God." Okay, so now we can see that the first part is just imagery. The first part is, this is what it is like. We would call it metaphorical language. And that if we go to verse 14 and 15, we see this metaphor returning. "Deliver me out of the mire and let me not sink." And here's what it's all about. "Let me be delivered from those who hate me and out of the deep waters. Let not the flood waters overflow me, nor let the deep swallow me up, nor let the pit shut its mouth on me." Here is someone going through a tremendous amount of hardship from enemies. Because if we didn't understand it from verses 1 and 2, of which we could apply it to almost anything, any kind of hardship, or apply it literally. But now we understand it concerns his enemies. And he's about to say this in verse 4. So we've read verse 3. Here is this waiting for God. And I do want to address this before we go to verse 4. Waiting for God. And here is this language, "Save me, O God." And now these things, I'm weary with crying, my throat is dry, my eyes are failing me, while I'm waiting for Him, while I'm waiting for God. And there would seem to be this whole notion, this picture of someone who is in a very hard place in their life, extremely difficult place, where all the pressures are coming down upon that person, and that person is the Christ. That person is without a doubt the Christ. Everything coming down on them in a severe amount of pressure. And saying that, "Save me, O God," and waiting for Him. These things are occurring while I wait for Him. But I want you to notice something. In verse 14, there's something, not 14, verse 13. There's something that shows, all right, whoever's saying this, and we know that it's the Christ, whoever's saying this, also, while there is this point of desperation, also knows God's going to do what He's going to do in His time. Watch this, verse 13. "But as for me, my prayer is to you, O Lord," look at these next words, "in the acceptable time." In the acceptable time. Whatever time that may be, but in the acceptable time. "O God, in the multitude of your mercy, hear me in the truth of your salvation." Here is someone, while saying, I am falling into the mire. I am about to drown in troubles. My eyes have tired from waiting. My throat is dry from waiting. But in the acceptable time, I know it's going to happen. In the acceptable time, you will answer this prayer. In the acceptable time, that's when this is going to happen. I may want it to happen now, but it's going to happen at the right time, when it needs to happen. Now, we go to verse 4. Those who hate me without cause are more than the hairs of my head. Here is this, I don't think it's an exaggeration at all. I think it would be much easier to count the hair on someone's head than to have counted all the enemies that Christ had. Because they would be a mass of people going from Herod, and I'm talking about Herod the Great, who wanted him dead immediately. Christ doesn't even have the opportunity, as far as Herod the Great was concerned. He's going to kill him as an infant, get rid of him fast. They knew who they were dealing with. They knew who they were against. They knew it. They knew the prophecies were being fulfilled. They just were wicked people. That's what they were. Wicked people. But starting from him, going then to others through time, and especially when it comes to his ministry and it comes to his teaching, there are those who hate him, and they become his enemies. Even his friend who shared bread with him, who ate bread with him, becomes a betrayer. All right, that's a lot. That's a lot of people. And he says, let's just repeat, those who hate me without cause are more than the hairs of my head. Hate me without cause. There's no legitimate reason why they should hate him. What has he done to them? What evil has he done to them? Now they're going to treat him as though he's wicked. They're going to treat him as though he's some kind of criminal. Matter of fact, they'll be willing to release a known and convicted murderer to kill Christ. They'll make that trade-off. What kind of trade-off is that? A man who has never killed anyone, and your biggest complaint in all of this, at least what you're presenting, is he said that he would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. All right, what crime is that now? What crime is that? At worst, it's just the rantings of a madman. Probably that sounds like somebody's making this up. But if that's all you've got nothing. If that's all you've got. And here we're going to trade him off for a known, like I said, known and convicted murderer. Let Barabbas out, but kill Christ. Now, let's continue in verse 4. They are mighty who would destroy me, being my enemies wrongfully. Notice this next thing. Though I have stolen nothing, I still must restore it. Here are all these false claims, and there are quite a number of them. I mentioned only one that they're going to present, but here are all these false claims that he makes himself equal to God, that's true. He is equal with God. But they didn't like that. They didn't want to have to admit that at all. And the various things that he did, they wanted to see as breaking the Sabbath, which he never broke a single law. All these things, and they're going to bring the full weight of Roman law right on top of him, as though he were a murderer, as though he were someone that truly was an enemy of Israel and of Rome. But he's none of that. He's none of that at all. though he's stolen nothing, still he's going to have to repay. He's going to have to do this. Now, here is the thing concerning the Christ. He's absolutely sinless, yet he's going to have to bear the price, bear the entire weight of all sin of all time, from beginning to end. He's going to have to bear it. Though sinless, he's going to bear that price. Though sinless, he is the redemptive price of all of it. Sinless, that is what he is going to do. The price of all sin. Now, verse 5. O God, now here's some things we need to know. You know my foolishness, and my sins are not hidden from you. Now, that is not saying he's done anything foolish, or that there's any sin at all. Now, Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 15, tempted in every way as we are, yet without sin. Christ did not sin whatsoever. But here is this idea that, the Father would know everything about the Son, as he knows everything about everyone. He knows that, there is no theft that's involved here. There's no blasphemy. There is nothing that he's done that's worthy of death. There's nothing. There's nothing that would carry so much as a prison sentence, let alone the death penalty. And now, verse 6, let not those who wait for you, and look at this. This shows the internal thinking of Jesus and the struggles he went through. I am positive of it. I am positive of it. Of internal thinking. Let not those who wait on you, O Lord God of hosts, be ashamed because of me. Of a misstep, of a misdeed, of a bad example. Don't let those who wait on you, well, who would that be? Well, there would be plenty. John the Baptist would be one. Those that are his disciples would be more. You have those such as that came on pretty quick, of Andrew and Peter and James and John and others, and Mary, his mother. All of them were very quick on board. They were very quick into following Christ. They have been waiting on God. And he says, don't let them, or that he's praying, don't let them be ashamed because of me. Let not those who seek you be confounded or dishonored because of me, O God of Israel. Now, there's a humility in that. And there is an understanding that potentially anyway, he could fail. Potentially, that is something that could have happened. But it doesn't. He's put to the test. And let me just ask this. What's the point of putting something to the test that cannot possibly fail? What's the point in that? Well, it would be a cakewalk. This is obviously not easy. This is obviously loaded with trials, loaded with temptations, loaded with seeing those who he knows are his enemies because they've been that way, Satan, and those that should offer some kind of comfort, such as his brothers, which he's become an alien to them. He's a stranger to them. Or even those of his closest friends, such as Peter, who will deny him, Judas, who will betray him, others who will be scattered. Okay? This is a huge trial, hardship. This is more than anyone else has ever had to bear, because the weight of everything is on him, which cannot be said concerning someone like Job. Job went through a tremendous hardship. I'm not going to belittle that, but he did not have this weight on top of him at all. He didn't have this weight of where that the salvation of mankind waits on Job. No one waited on Job. Nothing was balanced on top of Job except Job. That's it. Nothing was balanced on top of him, but it is on Christ. Now, verse 7, because for your sake I have borne reproach. So this goes to places like Isaiah 53 and 4. Stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. So for your sake I have done this. For your sake I have borne reproach. Shame has covered my face. So here's this idea of shame. Here's this idea of reproach. Here is this, that this is happening and it hurts. God is in the flesh and it hurts. Well, of course it does. Now, verse 8. I have become a stranger to my brothers and an alien to my mother's children. Once again, here is a finger pointing right to places like John 7 and 5 of where his brothers, they don't believe he's the Christ at all. That's just the older brother. That's all. It isn't until after his resurrection that they believe. Then they believe he's the Christ. Prior to that, they don't. He's just a stranger to them. When Jesus leaves Nazareth and he's going to be baptized by John. He's going to be baptized by John. And he begins his ministry. Of course, he's going to be 40 days in the wilderness as well. He's going to begin his ministry. And a lot of things, there's going to be a general uproar that's beginning to happen because everything that occurred from the baptism of John now to him entering into cities, and he's healing people, and he is being followed by thousands, and he is teaching. Now he goes to Nazareth, and after saying that Isaiah, the sayings of Isaiah are being fulfilled in their hearing, and he begins to speak to them, and they are really overwhelmed by the things that he says, but they try to kill him. They try to toss him off a cliff. They try to kill him. No, it's not his time. That's not the way he's supposed to die. And so they're unable to do it. And his brothers would have been there as well. Were they trying to kill him? Well, there's no evidence of that, but they don't believe. They don't believe that he can be the Christ. Their mother does, but they do not. Now, verse 9. This goes to John 2 and 17. Because zeal for your house has eaten me up. That goes right to Jesus and the cleaning out the temple. Because it had become a den of thieves, as he describes it, a den of thieves. It's not just a matter of just harmless commerce. It was a den of thieves. That's what it was. It wasn't trying to help people learn or to help people grow spiritually or to help them in any way. It was to cheat them out of their things, whether it was animals or whether it was coins, whatever it was, cheat them out of those things and supply them with what is acceptable in the temple. And they made a tremendous amount of money doing that. And it's a den of thieves, and he clears it out. Now, we continue on. Because zeal for your house has eaten me up, and the reproaches of those who reproach you have fallen on me. Romans 15:3 applies it to Christ. Applies this right to Christ. And that you have those that hate God hate his Son as well, because he's from God. He is God. Now verse 10. When I wept and chastened my soul with fasting, they became my reproach. So here is this weeping again. Verse 11. I also made sackcloth my garment. I became a byword to them. Now, this is very similar to what Jesus said to those that they had complained about John the Baptist. Now they were complaining about him. And he says this, it's a little saying. He says, we played the flute for you and you didn't dance. You didn't join in on this. And we wept and you didn't mourn. That somehow, no matter what he did, it wouldn't satisfy them. No matter what he did. And yes, it's a byword to them. And here is this cruel kind of thing. And I think it's a detail that the Gospels don't give. But I think it's here. It's a tale of little facts in all this. Verse 12, those who sit in the gate speak against me, and I am a song of the drunkards. I think that's absolutely true. I think it is. I think that is a fact concerning the life of Christ, that he was ridiculed from the highest to the lowest. I think he absolutely was. And to those who are in the gate and just the drunks on the street. Now, verse 13. But as for me, my prayer is to you, O Lord, and here we go, in the acceptable time. In the acceptable time. Understanding that, yes, there is a time that's of action that God's going to take it. It may not be this second. It may not be today. It may not be next week. But he's going to do it. And it will be the acceptable time. And here, the writer of this, the creator of this psalm, the one who is speaking this understands that, yeah, it may not be now. While I would like it now, it may not be now. But it's all in the acceptable time. O God, in the multitude of your mercies, hear me in the truth of your salvation. Hear this prayer. Now we return back to the mire, as it were. Deliver me out of the mire and let me not sink. Let me be delivered from those who hate me and out of the deep waters. Let not the flood waters overflow me, nor let the deep swallow me, and let not the pit shut its mouth on me. So here we understand what all that means. Deliver me from those who hate me. That's what it means. Now we have verse 6, hear me. This is the second time he said that. Hear me, O Lord, for your loving kindness is good. Turn to me according to the multitude of your tender mercies, and do not hide your face from your servant, for I am in trouble. Hear me speedily. There it is. Heed me speedily. Now he's already said in the acceptable time, but now heed me speedily. This is what he wants, but he knows it may not be now. It may not be. Verse 18, draw near to my soul and redeem it. Deliver me from my enemies. You know my reproach, my shame, and my dishonor. My adversaries are all before you. Reproach has broken my heart, and I'm full of heaviness. I looked for someone to take pity, but there was none, and for comforters, but I found none. Here is being brokenhearted, absolutely brokenhearted, and he's alone. He's absolutely alone. He looked for comforters. There wasn't any. There was no one there. Verse 21. They also gave me gall for my food, and for my thirst they gave me vinegar to drink. And of course we know what that is. That's on the cross where that occurred. Matthew chapter 27, verse 34. Let their table become a snare before them, and their well-being a trap. Now, all of these things we see from this would be at numerous places in the life of Christ. That is, the zeal of your house has eaten me up. Okay, that's not on the cross. He's not on the cross when that occurs. And when you have places such as he just made mention of being in sackcloth, that's also not on the cross where that would occur, or that he becomes this thing of mockery. Well, that was before we get to the cross. Now, specifically, what we just read in verse 21, that is at the cross. Now we see these words. Let their table become a snare before them, and their well-being a trap. Let them, and he's going to continue in that vein in all of this. Let their well-being be a trap. Let their eyes be darkened so they do not see, and make their loins shake continually. Pour out your indignation upon them, and let your wrathful anger take hold of them. Let their dwelling place be desolate, and let no one live in their tents. Okay, now in all this, let their table become a snare and their well-being a trap, or let them, when they're at peace, let that be their trap. They think that all is well. They think that they have done right, or they think that they have succeeded. And it's a trap. It hasn't happened at all. That is, there has been no success in this. What they thought they were going to be able to do, they haven't really done. Verse 26, for they persecute the ones you have struck, and talk of the grief of those you have wounded. This goes back to Isaiah 53:10, showing this to be the case, prophesying this concerning the Christ. It is smitten, struck by God, struck by Him. He's the one that this is all in the plan. This must happen, and it will happen. Add iniquity to their iniquity, verse 27, and let them not come into your righteousness. Verse 28, let them be blotted out. Look at this. Let them be blotted out of the book of the living. That's the book of life. We read about that. Come Revelation 20 in verse 15. That's astonishing what he's just saying there. And you know, this would be one of those places where the Pharisees could have gone to show there is a resurrection. This is one of those places. There's more than this, but there's more going into the Old Testament to prove, yeah, the Old Testament did teach of the resurrection, and not be written with the righteous, or not be recorded with the righteous. And we have places like that shown in Revelation 7, beginning in verse 2, going to 8. Also in the book of Ezekiel in chapter 9, verses 1 to 7. Both of them very similar in that those who belong to God are being sealed, Revelation, or marked in Ezekiel. That is, God knows who they are. God knows precisely who they are, because His seal or His mark is on there. And here in this psalm, it's don't let them be written with the righteous. Don't let them be sealed with the righteous. Don't let them have that mark of God on them as with the righteous. Verse 29, but I am poor and sorrowful. Let your salvation, O God, set me on high. Now, it changes. It changes in these last few verses. And here is this idea of absolute hope. And it's more than hope. It's just a surety, complete assurity that this is going to happen. I will praise the name of God with the song, and will magnify Him with thanksgiving. This also shall please the Lord better than an ox or bull which has horns and hooves. His praise is going to do more than these other things. The humble shall see this and be glad, and you who seek God, your hearts shall live. Why? Because Christ did the very thing He was supposed to do. If Christ failed, then there would be nothing for us to have any hope. That it would be absolute dismal. There would be no way we could return back to God. None at all. The humble shall see this and be glad, because it has been done. Verse 33, for the Lord hears the poor and does not despise his prisoners. He hears the righteous. He hears the poor in spirit. Yes, he hears those who are poor. He hears them. He hears the afflicted. He hears these things that occur, and he is answering them. In the acceptable time, he's answering them. Verse 34. And we could go back up into verse 33. What was the prophecy concerning Jesus? Matter of fact, he reads it there in Luke chapter 4 as he's at Nazareth. He's returned back to Nazareth, and he reads that prophecy. He's reading from Isaiah 61, beginning in verse 1. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. This is verse 18, so Luke chapter 4, verse 18. Because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. That's what Isaiah speaks of. And here we have David writing this, and in my mind, it's Jesus who's writing it before he even comes to this earth, because it expresses what he feels. The heartache, the trouble, the grief, the loneliness, the pressure, all of it upon him. And now we see in this, the Lord hears the poor. He does not despise his prisoner. Verse 34, let heaven and earth praise him, the seas and everything that moves in them. Look at this, verse 38, for God will save Zion. Well, how's he going to do that? How's God going to save Zion? By the Christ. And he begins this psalm by saying, save me, O God. And now it is God will save Zion and build the cities of Judah, that they may dwell there and possess it. And this is the very hope of Israel that some are going to ignore. Many are going to ignore. This is the very salvation of Zion and the salvation of the entire world. Also, verse 36, also the descendants of his servants shall inherit it, and those who love his name shall dwell in it. It's eternal. There's nothing temporary about what he did. It is eternal. It would save those in the first century, and it will save us today. It is the very sacrifice that was needed all the way through time, that goes from beginning to end. All sins, he bore them. All sins, he paid for it. He was the redemptive price. And to think that this was just some kind of easy exercise for him, it wasn't. It was not. And the love of God truly is shown in Christ and what he was willing to do. And it comes down to this again. Why would God love you? I don't know why he would love me. I really don't. But he does. And I am glad he does. I'm glad he does. Because we are in his image. And we can be his children. And that's what he wants. He wants our hearts. He wants our dedication. He wants us to serve and worship and glorify him by his works. This evening, the emotions of the Messiah show a deep suffering, But there's also that deep love that brought him through it all. That deep love for the Father and the Holy Spirit, for God entirely, and for all of us. We need to look at our lives and understand the one that went through that is the one that's going to be judging us all. And that the book of the living, as shown, as mentioned there in Psalm 69, you want your name in that book. That book shows up again in the judgment. It shows up again. And the book of life is opened, and we're judged according to those books. These books here. Those books are opened as well. And we're judged according to our deeds in this standard. We ask this evening, if you need to respond to the invitation, that you come as we stand and sing.